guys, welcome back to my channel. So for today's video I thought I would sit down and react to my very first mouse care. So in the grand scheme of things, I have not had mice very long compared to other pets. I did get my first ever mouse after I had my rats, and also when I had already started this channel actually, so I've not had mice for that long compared to other animals. If I was to find, or if I had footage and pictures of how I used to care for my hamsters and gerbils growing up, that would be a much more savage video, but I still wouldn't replicate the care that I gave my first mouse with the mice that I have at the moment compared to the care I give them right now. So I still wanted to react to and pick apart the way that I care for my first ever mouse. It's not the worst in the world, but I still would not do it today, and I thought it'd be interesting to take a look and pick it apart. So just for a bit of backstory, it was a very different time in my life. I was a university student. I think I was in my second or third year living in university accommodation, and I wasn't technically allowed to have pets. I'm pretty sure the landlord did know that I did have pets, because if you have a male mouse you pretty much can't hide the fact. And I couldn't have a big enclosure like this one because one, I didn't have the space, and two, I did need something that I could easily transport either home or to friends' houses if they were looking after them whilst I was gone or something. I needed an easily transportable kind of collapsible wire plastic cage, which is what I have, and we'll get into that in a second, but there was just no way or nowhere for me to have an enclosure quite like this one, and to be honest, I hadn't done as much research or know as much about mice to have something like this. So I did start with an intact male mouse, and that was Fig. If you've been following me since the Fig days, wow, that is a very long time, but he was just a very good mouse. He was so funny, he had so much personality, and I don't regret starting with a male mouse because he gave me such a good experience, and he was kind of the gateway into owning mice and continuing to own them. But I think mostly the reason I did decide to start with a male is just because I did have a friend that also had rats, and she also had a male mouse, and she really enjoyed him, so I thought I would probably also enjoy that male mouse as well if she enjoys them, and that's mostly my reasoning behind starting with a male in the first place. So I guess that's the first thing that I probably would not replicate, is getting another intact male mouse. You know, I have a neutered male mouse in with my girls, but I am very vocal on the fact that I don't really want to have another intact male again, just because I really cannot deal with the smell of them, and Fig was a very potent mouse, and that kind of put me off from getting any more intact males. But I also have a neutered male at the moment, and I think I do much prefer that, so I probably would never replicate that in terms of getting another intact male mouse, unless for some reason I ever decided in the future that I wanted to breed mice, which I think is very unlikely, especially at the moment. I can't see myself doing that anytime soon. That would probably be the only reason I would obviously have to have an intact male mouse, but probably not going to get one anytime soon or anytime ever in the future again, and that's the main thing that I would not replicate. So let's take a look at the first ever video that I filmed with him and uploaded with him. This was pretty early on in my YouTube thing, and I think this was the first video where I ever really got criticism or constructive criticism, because he was in a very tiny cage. This was only temporary, and it was only meant to be temporary, but I had to get him very last minute just because I think I texted the person a couple days before I got him just saying that I was interested and wanted to look at the male mice, and I think she was so desperate to get rid of them because they were fighting so much that she just said, okay, I'll bring him ASAP. And I had nothing, I had no bedding, I didn't even have the cage because I had ordered that online, and I had to quickly go to a local pet store and just get a really tiny starter cage that's not suitable for anything to live in. I've still got that cage in the cupboard. I use it for my rat introductions, but I got a bit of stick for this on the video because me being new to making content online, I guess I just forgot to disclaim that in the video, which is fair enough. I like this one. Okay, so the first thing I'm spotting is that I'm using back to nature bedding on the base, which is not a terrible idea, especially when it comes to male mice. They have a very strong, potent odour, which some beddings can just not handle this. I know some people use back to nature for the whole cage with the mice, which is not something that I would personally do again. As you can see in my cage at the moment, I've got a very deep layer of a mix of different beddings, which gives them a really good deep layer to dig in and burrow, which you can't really do with the back to nature paper pellet bedding. That is a mouthful. So I wouldn't use this again with mice. Maybe in like certain areas I would use this, but this was all I had. I think if this was in 2017, I was probably also only using that with my rats, which is why it was the only bedding I had at the time to quickly put in there. So that's probably why I used that. I don't know at what stage I switched to a different bedding, but so I'm putting the plastic shelf that comes with the temporary cage that I got in, which with a very stinky male mouse is going to be scent marking all over the shelf. I should have just not bothered, and I think I did take that out a couple of days after because it just stunk. The wheel. So this is the wheel that came with the temporary cage, and I just should have not included this. I can't remember how old he was at the time. I think he was probably about 8 to 10 weeks old, but he was still a pretty big mouse at that point, and I just should have not bothered putting a wheel in because this one is too small to use with mice. I can't remember the exact measurements of this, but I have this cage up there which I could probably work out how big this is. I'll put it on screen if I can find the measurements, but minimum for mice I recommend nothing smaller than about 8 inches, especially for bigger show mice, and he was a big boy, so I should have just not bothered using this wheel for any period of time, even if it was just a really short time, which I can't remember when I got a bigger wheel, but this one should have just gone straight in the bin. Okay, so I used to feed the Science Selective nuggets for mice. I don't know as much about this as I do with their rat version, but I think they also now make a rat and mouse combined version, which is just a bit of a nightmare in itself. I don't mind this food. I think it smells nice, and also it's alright for mice. It's one of the better ones on the market, but the fact that it is a nugget is not very enriching for them, and I would either use this as a combination between a mix and also use the nugget kind of mixed in 50-50 if you want to, but I probably wouldn't personally feed this just by itself just because it's a bit boring, and they're also massive. When you give a full one of these to a mouse, they're like holding it like this, so maybe break them up for them or just give them as part of the mix, but I wouldn't personally feed my mice just this by itself anymore. I'm also feeding it in his food bowl, which, I mean, you can't really scatter feed that kind of nugget, especially in the bedding that I was using, so you wouldn't have got much enrichment if I'd done that, but probably even a tiny bit more than just giving it to him in a food bowl, which, you know, I'm not really for the whole food bowl thing anymore, so I would have just ditched the food bowl, but 2017 me thought that was a cute idea, so that's fine. Oh, the carpets in that place were rank. Like, every time you stepped on them, you would get a black foot. Like, it was disgusting. The landlord didn't care at all, and we reported the carpets, and they're probably still there now, 3 years later, just rotting and disgusting. Oh, my baby. He was one of the cutest mice, hands down, I've ever had. Oh, what? Suddenly the blue wheel has switched for a green wheel, which still isn't big enough. Where did I get that from?
Yeah, the breeder dropped him off, and...
Why do I sound about 5 years old? Why was I such a baby? This was only like...
before I even like attempt to handle him or anything.
4 years ago. Oh my god. Hello, Crumble. Can we just take a moment to look at just how little bedding I actually gave him though? Like, I know it was a very shallow base, but I literally gave him like one paper pellet layer of bedding. Did I not have enough? Did I have like none in the house?
I've given him some tissue and he seems to be
What
enjoying
is my
nesting in there and
accent?
stuff, so hopefully he'll start feeling safe here soon, but I'm just gonna let him like
I just realised 88,000 people have watched me getting my pet mouse, and none of this is the correct way to care for a mouse. They probably just watched this and just thought, okay. Or they've watched this and thought, gosh, she doesn't know what she's doing. Which I clearly didn't.
Thought I'd just quickly talk through what I've got in his cage at the minute.
I thought I'd just quickly talk through what I've got in his cage at the minute. Yeah, somehow I don't think it'll take that long, hun. Okay, so the next video really that shows his proper setup once everything had turned up is a few months later in October. It's a Halloween cage tour, so hopefully this gives a bit more of an accurate look at the way I was caring for him initially after everything had turned up. Ooh, the editing. Oh. There's like nothing in there. Like, where is all of the cage straw when there's like nothing in the cage? That's not decorating, that's like 3 things in there. Oh my gosh, I'm so stressed. I'm so sorry, Fig.
So the cage that he has is the Pet in Plazo Plus.
This cage is awful, don't buy it.
For about £32, which is really good value.
There's a reason it's £32, it's awful. Okay, so we've switched up the bedding. He's got a much more burrowable, that's not even a word, much more easier bedding to dig and forage and burrow in. Probably could have done with a deeper layer, but with a cage like this, it's very hard to manage that. And he's got like a shredded cardboard bedding, and then in nesting areas, a shredded tissue bedding, and much more of it, which is good. I can't get over the fact I sound like an infant. I still have all of this stuff, bear in mind, but I would just use a lot more stuff in the cage. So at least the tiny plastic wheels have gone. He's got a flying saucer, and he loved that flying saucer. That was much better for him to run on. But if someone was to send me this cage to react to if I was reacting to mouse cages, I would just say that it's a bit boring. There's not enough in there for him to do. There's not enough enrichment. He needs so many more toys and climbing opportunities at the top. I think there's like 2 things on the top of the cage, and there's just not much enrichment. He's got things to hide in, houses, things like that, but he just needs a bit more something. Like, there's just not enough in there for him to really do, especially with him being by himself. I think if you're going to get a male mouse and you have no option but to house them by themselves because you don't have a vet to neuter them, you need to make their cage as enriching as possible. And I'm watching this and I feel awful that it's just a really boring basic setup with like 5 things in the cage. I never realised that it was this basic. Okay, let's quickly look at the Christmas cage tour, which would have been like 2 months after this one, just to see if it's even a little bit better, if I've redeemed myself, if I've got him any more stuff, or if it's just as depressing. Okay, so the bedding has changed again. I was using Bed Max shavings, which I used for a whole probably 2 weeks with my rats and my mice. I just don't like it. I don't get along with it. Some people like it, but I don't like it as a bedding. For me, having to vacuum it off the floor, and also my rats didn't really like it, so obviously I've switched it up again with using it with Fig, but the bedding is forever changing. But again though, I've put like a slither of bedding. I've not filled it like up to the plastic level of the base. I've put the tiniest slither, which is not really doing anything. He was so cute. Okay, no, there's really not much more in there. I've kind of switched a few things out. He's still got like 2 things to climb on. The bedding is really thin. He's not really got enrichment as such. He's got things that look nice but don't really serve much for keeping them busy and entertained. So no, by Christmas I still hadn't really improved anything. Okay, I think I'm going to stop there in terms of looking at my old mouse care, because I never realised it was that boring and that dismal. I have a much better memory of it in my head than when I look back, because it was just a bit boring. He needed so much more enrichment. There was nothing in there that could really physically harm him, but in terms of mental stimulation he needed so much more. Even just a thicker layer of bedding or a different bedding and scatter feeding him that could have provided him hours and hours of fun and enrichment than just giving it in a bowl. And he could have done with so many more climbing toys on the top, or maybe even foraging toys, or making him some toys. I just wish I'd given him a bit more in terms of that. So I do feel really bad looking back at that, but we all live and learn. I feel like unfortunately we have to make these kind of mistakes sometimes to better ourselves and better our care for the next pets, which I feel like I have definitely improved quite a lot since then. They have so much more bedding for starters. And of course they've also got more climbing toys, foraging toys. I tried to pack as much in as possible, and of course it is a bigger enclosure, which obviously I had to work with my lifestyle and the space I had at that time, but I hope you agree that my mouse care has come a long way. There is always a fly when I'm filming. Has come a long way since 3 years ago when I had Fig. I've definitely made a few improvements, and of course I'm still always learning and changing things. So yeah, that was my first ever initial mouse care. Not my proudest moment, not my finest moment, but we all have to start somewhere, and God knows why I choose to leave these videos up. Sometimes I think maybe I should just private some of these ones, especially mostly because I sound like an absolute infant in some of them, but I try to leave them up just to serve as a reminder that we all start somewhere, and hopefully you can kind of see my mouse care progressing. I will probably look back at this enclosure one day and think, oh, I would have changed this or this, but hopefully you can kind of see the improvements and learn something from it at least. So that is it for today's video. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope it's been at least entertaining. If you've been with me since the Fig era, then thank you for sticking with me through all of my questionable basic mouse care, and if you're new, don't forget to subscribe to see any more animal related videos from me, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!